been just yesterday, I managed to go to the opening of the Warsaw Festival, so I was told that this workshop is actually part of it, also festival, so that's everything I know about the context myself. But I understand that none of you is probably new to internet, and you operate smoothly in this area, maybe even more natural than I, because I came to this as a lawyer, as somebody fighting for human rights. More or less 10 years ago, I came to the conclusion that this is the technology and information is the area where interesting new challenges will be happening for people. Back then, I think many people believed that internet will mostly solve problems, that it will be the problem-solving machine for democracy, for market, for economy, for whatever you like. It seemed to be more solution than a problem, but some people, including us here at Panoptykon Foundation, believe that not necessarily technology will also come, it's always coming as well with the darker side. And for us, the darker side of this is the control, the controlling aspect of technology. So on one hand, of course, you can use it for whatever you want, and you might experience this as space of freedom. But on the other hand, there is usually this angle of somebody also being able to control you. And when it comes to data, to something that we generate with literally every click and every move we take in digital environment, it's very difficult to control who controls us with personal data. Yes, it's something that we don't see, we don't experience, that we generate, but we really generate, and it is collected and it's analyzed. So the question for Panoptykon for last 9 years of our activity in Poland and on the EU level, because we are also active in international networks, is to investigate that darker side, to expose it, to show it to people who might not necessarily be aware of this, but maybe above all to try to influence it by talking to companies and talking to governments, not only Polish government, also institutions in Brussels, fighting for better legal regulations to protect us, and also educating, also creating such space for people to do more hands-on things like workshops, install better, applications on their devices, learn something that they can do themselves to protect themselves. So we do all this, even though we are quite small organization based here in Warsaw. And today I was asked to come and talk to you, and I hope it will be more conversation than a lecture, but maybe I give you some food for thought, because we start talking about controlling information online, not only in the context of surveillance, which is my natural context, so not only in the context of who controls you as users or us as users, but also who controls the flow of information in the sense of news, in the sense of not personal data, but information which is something that we want to have access to. I think we still believe that it matters for democracy, for us as citizens. So I suppose I take it for granted that we all meet here on the premise that we want to have access to information. But is it really happening? I mean, is it really something that we can have easily online these days? Maybe before I show you what I think about it, I would really like to hear or get a feeling of the room right now when you think about it, how on the spectrum between internet gives me unlimited access to information, or internet is the filter bubble where I cannot access things I might like because I never even see them. If you have to place yourself on that spectrum, full access to information, full freedom, and feeling very limited, where would you put yourselves? Who would be closer to the optimistic spectrum, end of the spectrum, full access to information? Who believes that you can still find everything you want online, and it's basically space of freedom for you? Okay.
I would refuse the simplification maybe, because in a way we have many internets. So some parts of the internet are very much on that one side of the spectrum, and other parts of the internet are on the other side of the spectrum.
Sure, but in that case you are closer to full freedom because you can find internet that gives you this.
I try to.
Yeah, that internet exists for you. So that's my point. Of course, I'm simplifying because I'm not now talking about
specific services or specific places online. But in general, your point would be it's still possible to find spaces online where you can be free of those manipulations. And who feels after all those fake news stories and other dramas that happened over the last 2 years, I think, around online environment, who feels very limited and controlled in also accessing information, who might feel that freedom has been lost, like in a more radical way? Nobody. Okay, so you are on the more optimistic side. Good. Well, I'm not sure myself on which side I would put me. I think it was a very good point here that it really depends who is doing what online and how we use those tools. I'm afraid that most of the consumers of online services actually are on the very controlled, very limited side, because they are not aware of this fact that what they see, what they experience online is dictated by algorithms, is dictated by companies with very specific commercial logic who employ what we call algorithms to match us with specific types of content. So our freedom to choose what we see in Google, in Facebook, in Twitter is very limited. So if this is your internet, I would say that you are probably closer to that pessimistic side of the spectrum. If this is not your internet, if you try to be more active, proactive in accessing information and escape those filter bubbles, then you can probably feel more free and unlimited. So algorithm is, as I put here in a simple definition, just a formula for something. And as long as those formulas were applied to cooking recipes or production of car or mathematics where it belongs, I wouldn't say there is any problem. But these days, many formulas, programming formulas, are applied to humans. In different contexts. I will not today bring the whole context of surveillance, which is very relevant here, because quite often it happens that governments or companies try to predict what we will do, how we will behave, who we will be tomorrow, on the basis of some formulas that they create on us to process our data. But this is not the topic of today. We will mostly discuss algorithms and these manipulations that happen in the context of accessing information. Nevertheless, it is about humans, and it is really about this question: how decisions that have impact on our lives. Is this decision of the bank whether to give me a credit? Is this a decision of a policeman to stop and search me or not? Or is this a decision of a company to show me certain content or not? It can also be seen as decision. How those decisions are made, to what extent they are dictated by commercial interests, to what extent we can control them, and to what extent maybe this is some mathematical formula that nobody no longer controls, because even engineers who create them say those are black boxes. We just feed data in those formulas, in those algorithms, but we don't control how the machine, what is the logic inside of these black boxes, what are the decisions, how those decisions are made. So this is the reality that we are increasingly being pushed to. I like this picture just because it shows the chaos where many people like to see clean mathematical formulas. I think that algorithms used by the biggest companies like Facebooks and Googles of this world are not those neat, clean formulas that we can read and check and understand. No, they are actually quite complicated, quite alive in a way. Yes, I will not go into the details of machine learning and how this functions. We can maybe discuss this later if you are interested in understanding this better. I'm not a mathematician or computer scientist myself. I'm a lawyer, as we said at the beginning, but I'm learning this and trying to understand how algorithmic decision-making operates these days, because it is a legal problem, it is a social problem, it is a media problem, and probably similar to you, I don't feel comfortable in recreating those processes. But why why would we care at all? Why would we bother in understanding those formulas and trying to understand how the content that we see online gets generated? This is one of many examples that probably you have seen last year. It was broadly commented on and shared, that graph and an article from BuzzFeed that went with that graph after Trump election, when fake news became suddenly big phenomenon for political commentators. That graph was used to prove the point, to say that on Facebook at some point people were much more engaged in something that researchers would call fake news rather than the real news. Yes, and for many it was the reason to regulate, to look for some solutions, to maybe question the campaign. For me, this is just a phenomenon that we see on the surface. Right? We see that something like that happened on Facebook, that people were engaged more with one type of content than the other. We could easily replace that with, I don't know, video of cats versus video of something else and do this kind of analysis. In a way, so what? I mean, what you can really say just by saying that people were engaging more with one type of content than the other. For me, this is, my point here is that I wouldn't be worried so much with content itself. I would never go into prohibiting any kind of content, into saying to Facebook or anybody, delegalize fake news because it's problematic for democracy. I would be rather asking the question how it happened and why it happened that people were more interested in something that was fake than something that provided real information. Why it happened in the first place? Was it the choice of those people? Because if it was their conscious choice, they were entertained simply more by fake news starring Trump and the Pope because they thought it was funny, and that was it. We shouldn't worry maybe so much if it was their conscious choice as consumers of information and they understood what they are consuming. But if it was a different story, if Facebook did that with its algorithm and promoted fake content produced as a strategic effort by people cooperating with the Trump team, or it was Russian bots or any other bots who went into Facebook network, manipulated that network and caused that effect, then we have a very different story. Yes? So for me, what is mostly the most interesting aspect of all this is trying to understand who controls this news agency. I mean, here using Facebook example just because I have the feeling that many of you know this website, and that this is the website where we all kind of can imagine how it works. But of course, it applies to any other space online where you have access to user-generated content, and there is a filter between you and that content. So it can be basically any service, YouTube, Amazon, any bigger online shop. Of course, any search engine works along the same lines, that between you and the content that is potentially available, there is some kind of filter, some kind of algorithm, some kind of engine that we cannot open and understand. We cannot check what logic that thing is based on. So this is the point made by my colleague Claudio Agosti, who started a research project called Facebook Tracking Exposed, who's making that point that Timeline is not your news agency, it's somebody else's news agency, and the good question for us is to understand who is behind it. What he is doing is he's inviting people, I think everybody can participate, to share your Facebook timeline in order to do some experiments with his software to try to recreate the logic of your timeline. So he's trying to map what were the factors that dictated what you eventually found on your timeline. Was it the fact that you liked something, the fact that it comes from your friend, or the fact that it was paid for, or the fact that it was whatever else? I don't even know all the criteria. There are thousands of these criteria, and we don't know them. So this is an effort to learn something more. Another problematic aspect of how access to information online works is the advertising. Yes, probably it won't be new for you when I say that Facebook and most of online companies where we don't pay for the service are mostly advertising services. Yes, they are marketing companies. We might see them differently. We might see them as social networking site or a shop or a search engine, but what they really are in terms of business model, how they make their money, they make money through marketing. They sell access to your attention as potential consumers who will buy something else to people who pay for this. And this is the main feature of those services. So they do everything to be able to provide that function at good price to their real customers, while selling our attention or selling, commercializing, not selling our data. And for them, the big thing, something that was also a lot on headlines last year and this year too, is micro-targeting. Yes, we are no longer targeted online on the basics of our demographics, like your age, your gender, your level of education, because this is not effective. We are targeted on the basis of our very personal profile, of who we are, in a way. And again, of course, nobody cares that I'm Katarzyna and I have those emotions, those ideas, those beliefs. This is not important. What is important is that I'm the consumer who clicked on those things that I clicked before, who might be right now looking for, I don't know, shoes or car or laptop or travel, and maybe I have this mood or that mood. Maybe I will be buying faster today or slower tomorrow. Maybe I have this amount of money to spend. So things that matter for micro-targeters are those things that can be commercialized. And in that sense, it's true when those companies say, we don't care about who you are. True, they don't care who we are, really. They care what we can buy and how they can control our shopping behavior or our political behavior. Because if you look at the context of micro-targeting, how this is done, it more and more goes into areas like politics, recruitment, not just shopping, but more and more important areas of our life. This is a model, I will not go into this, I just wanted to show you this. Probably you've heard about this research. It is research done at Stanford University, I believe, by Michał Kosiński and his team, proving the point that on the basis of only 100 Facebook likes, researchers are able to predict with quite high accuracy your hidden characteristics. Yes, it was quite big news at some point, so I'm pretty sure that you've heard this from the media one time or another. It's old research. That research is at least 4 years old. We commented on this years ago, but it became famous again in the context of Trump. Because we heard after the Trump campaign that people who did the campaign actually used similar model, just more effective based on bigger amounts of data than the original one. But even the original one, based on just 100 Facebook likes, according to those researchers who did it, and I think nobody falsified them yet, show that quite a lot of things that we might not like to show to advertisers, recruiters, politicians, bankers, whoever, can be interpreted from our behavior. If this can be interpreted from your likes on Facebook, from 100 likes, what can be interpreted from the whole history of what you do online, especially if Facebook is interpreting, yes? Facebook who has every move, every digital piece that you leave behind. So this is only a teaser to show that actually the capacity of companies who have information on us to control this behavior, our behavior online, is quite worrying, can be quite worrying. It's quite worrying for me, because if somebody knows what exactly type of personality I have, what sort of problems, issues, addictions, soft spots I have as human being, and they know timing for this, so they know that this is particular time when I'm more extrovert or more introvert or more depressed or more anxious about, I don't know, any aspect of my life, is it sex or politics or health, they can abuse that knowledge pretty effectively. And this is just a graph proving their point that those predictions made by machine, by the algorithm, were much more accurate than predictions made for the sample they researched, much more accurate than predictions made by work colleagues, by friends, cohabitants. Only spouse, so the closest partner, got better rating, but not such a big difference. You see the red dot is computers accuracy, and the spouse is just a little bit above. So give a bit more data to the algorithm, and it will be even more effective in understanding who you are, how you think, what you need, what are your hidden specifics and needs, than the closest person with whom you spend your life. So the real stake, of course, here is power, and is who will be influencing our decisions in much more important context than buying shoes or laptops. This is again what happened in the US during the Trump campaign, that was heavily fueled with this kind of data manipulations. You can see this is just a small part of a much longer graph showing how effectively Trump's campaign was able to actually change people's political opinions, or move them much further to the right. When they started, people were in different places, they were much more likely to shift towards Democratic side. They also moved some Democrats to the right, which is not easy in the US. And in all this, we have Mark Zuckerberg, who, as a result of those allegations that Facebook was used in the campaign, maybe abused, maybe Russian bots were involved, maybe Trump won because of Facebook, blah, 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 all that was in the debate last year. So what Mark did, he, probably you have seen that too, he announced his own vision of doing politics with your data, with our data, globally. So he produced a manifesto, like an essay. It's more like a short essay, where he explains his vision of doing politics on his social networking site in his empire, on the basis of data he has on people. And what he's proposing is that Facebook becomes a state in itself. Facebook becomes sort of political community where decisions made by people or decisions made by the social network might even maybe at some point be in conflict with decisions made by local states. And what then? I mean, he has already built the biggest empire in terms of numbers. He already has more people than any other country in the world. So this is that becomes problematic if this company will be effectively trying to apply its own political thinking and trying to project itself as new type of political community, because again, the communication in this political community, the voting, the negotiation of rules will not be done by humans, will be increasingly done with the use of those machines that we don't exactly control. I will skip that one because this is quite legal stuff, and I think I will not bore you with this. My main point here in this matrix is to show something I will not be going into today, that fake news is just another problem of many problems with online content that we have. Filter bubbles are not the only problem we have with online content. And there can be different solutions to those problems. Not all those solutions have to be generated by companies. We also can have legal solutions. We can also have grassroots civic solutions that we generate. But it so happens that companies, business, is the most effective actor in proposing solutions to those problems that politicians see. And for me, this is problematic. It is problematic when companies who very often generate those problems, like filter bubble problem is specifically generated by companies, are at the same time trying to solve it and trying to, in a way, adopt the function of the state or the function of political community. So for me, the key question should be how we control them, how we people, how we creators of content, how we citizens can control those gatekeepers who control information on us and who also control our access to information like news. Big part of this struggle is the fight for algorithmic transparency. So we started with I started with showing you the definition of algorithm and trying to explain you how big is the impact of those mathematical formulas on what we see online, what we find online, how our life online actually works. So for me, it's very important to fight for transparency in this area. I would like most of the companies who use them to reveal the criteria they are using, especially to provide us with information or to predict our behavior. Here we have interesting legal regulation coming up into force next year in May. It's called General Data Protection Regulation. It is a big reform on the EU level, which deals with the problem of personal data. And in that law, we find a rule that when somebody is taking decisions on us in an automated manner, so there is no human being deciding, but there is algorithm deciding, they should actually reveal the logic involved in this process, but also explain us its significance and the consequences. So I like this rule, and I think it will be it will be nicely applied in the context of banks who do the scoring, or insurance companies who calculate how much we should pay for insurance policy. But I wonder if we will be able as citizens to fight for this rule to be applied to Facebook, to places like Facebook, because those companies can come and say, we don't take any decisions, we only show you things or don't show you things, but you are taking decisions. In my opinion, no, they are taking decisions with regard to what kind of worldview they are shaping and what kind of advertising, hidden or open, they are offering us, which can have impact on our life. So as community of people fighting for digital rights, we will certainly be fighting for this rule to be applied in the context like Facebook and Google, but if we succeed, I still don't know. So the big buzzword or the big concept coming up in our community of lawyers, technicians, activists is algorithmic accountability. Is how can we keep companies, specifically companies, but also governments who increasingly rely on big data and mathematical formulas to predict or shape our behavior, how we keep them accountable. This is just one of the very many pieces you can find online if you search for this term that will show some type of thinking. I think that one is from MIT, a researcher. So it only proves the point that the most clever people in the most influential academic institutions and media outlets are thinking about this for at least 3 last years. Unfortunately, we still didn't got to the point where we have good solutions on how to effectively force companies, because they have to be forced to do that, to become more accountable. But this is slowly happening, and this is exactly the big question for me. And I wonder if maybe you have any ideas, or at least if you share my concern that this area of business, this area of using information about us, should be more controlled by the society itself, because we are running into serious problems if we are not able to understand how key media function. The key sources of information already for most of us are social media and internet outlets. This is proven by all available research that people increasingly move from reading news on the original website or, of course, watching TV towards platforms, online platforms where they get content filtered by those non-transparent mechanisms. So the big question for me is how to change that situation. I'm really open for many ideas from you. I also have some myself, and I guess this is this introduction I wanted to make to try to talk to you about this issue, and get a little brainstorm around what's problematic here and what can be done in your opinion. What do you think?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. To answer your question, maybe just to throw this in to start the discussion. Is that what you'd like? Yeah. Okay. I think one of the challenges is to break this down to a very human level and a very visual level, coming from the storytelling perspective, and with stories that are often protagonist-driven. I think this is one of the challenges, is to make sure that the work that is done in NGOs like yours or Algorithm Watch in Germany or other organizations like that is to really break it down to a very human experience level. And I think this is part of the solution. I'm not saying that this is it, but I think we need to do much more of that so that it's very understandable on also an emotional level.
So we can imagine building a narrative with a human in the center, telling specific story, like imagine something happened online and you don't understand how it happened, and
For instance,
would that be?
But many narratives, like not just one narrative. We need a lot of projects that detail like how algorithmic governance and algorithmic decisions impact our lives, and also then in a larger context, democracy. I think this is much needed, because I see this conversation very much situated in academia and in the activist circles, and it's too slowly trickling down.
Yeah, that's where it starts. It always starts there, but I agree that we need more. I fully agree that we need more tools for reaching out. Myself, I'm involved in one of those efforts, and I'm more than happy to share results, maybe for your constructive critique or improvement or whatever you can contribute. Together with some researchers from Belgrade, from Share Labs, they did very deep research on Facebook, trying to map how the algorithms on Facebook specifically work. They created huge, incredible map. Maybe I can find it later and show you. And that map, it took me weeks to understand it. So I thought, no, it's impossible. We will not be able to use it with people, with human beings that are not into this bubble. So what we did, we created a monologue of the algorithm, a story based on explaining from the perspective of algorithm what happens, what it does to humans on human examples. So we used example of political profiling, of finding out about pregnancy against the intention of the person who didn't want that to be known, price discrimination, so selling more expensive tickets to somebody than to somebody else. So we found some examples, real life examples, that this algorithm is explaining how he or she, actually there was female voice, how she got to those conclusions on the basis of data provided by this particular person. So we had 3 stories built around this map. It was art installation presented at the Media Art Biennale. Now I think it's in 3 places, in Ljubljana, in Miami, and in Krakow. You can see it, where you can choose your angle, your story, a person, and go through this map as that person. But still, it's one small effort, still quite complicated, because it takes a bit time to understand it. You have to be in that installation. It's a big and complex thing, and also expensive to move around. But yes, we need this heavily. So any concepts or any openness for collaboration.
Because, for instance, we are now doing. So I'm presenting today the project Pre-Crime about predictive policing, and we're now prototyping the game about predictive policing. And basically, the challenge we have is like, how do we explain the algorithms used in predictive policing? Because basically, we have this fictional story, and it's again like we're using real data, and basically to explain like how the data is used and what data is collected. That's still like kind of simple in a way to explain or to play with, but rather like the big challenge for us was how to explain how the algorithm works.
And do you know it? Do you have data on it or not? Are you guessing it, or you know it?
We have, like, we researched, we know what kind of algorithms are being used. However, they're not disclosed publicly. Mostly.
Yeah, that's what I think.
There's some, like there's one of them, HunchLab, that is open source. They want to do, like, they work only with open source data, and they use like basically these open source programs have like a very simple algorithm. Like it's either the earthquake algorithm or it's correlated with deep machine decoding processes, and but like the other softwares don't want to share. Like they're developed by IBM or and they don't want to share them. Nonetheless, basically, like it's not always about like the results don't change according to the algorithm. It's rather about what data is put in the algorithm. How you choose what data is being selected. Is it is it big data? Is it something open source? Is it data you collect from data brokers? Is it your private data from Facebook? Like what and then basically that depends on how you predict the crime. But so what we are now a little bit like playing with is also like this way to personify the algorithm, saying like that the algorithm becomes a character.
Explains its logic.
Exactly, and it's kind of like says like, oh, So you didn't put that you're straight or gay. Well, according to this, actually what you realize, Facebook algorithm, like the likes prediction, if you're male and you like Madonna and Desperate Housewives, you're 75% gay. So I'll just assume.
Yes, this is what I would also do myself. But I think it's good enough. I think when we try to build this personality around algorithms that they speak for themselves, it's already a nice move. Yeah. The problem might be that if really we are discussing, if we are really confronted with machine learning and not a simple. We can maybe discuss that later, because I'm not sure if this is clear for anybody, everybody, and if it's interesting for everybody in the room. But essentially, unfortunately for us, algorithms that are predictive algorithms, probably developed by IBM and big companies, they are not as simple as tables, where you can say, okay, watching this program meaning that, doing this meaning that. It's not. That would be easy if we could say, if you have brown eyes, the algorithm says that you are 20% you have 20% likelihood of being criminal because of the brown eyes. If it was that, we could say this and expose it and of course criticize it. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Quite often we hear from those scientists who develop those systems that no, there is no. Not a single data is weighted in that simple way. There are no attributed characteristics are not attributed to another characteristics in a stable way. So they cannot recreate this logic. But for me, if really we are discussing black boxes, if any system, any criminal system, any justice system is based on something I would call black box, which logic cannot be recreated in that way, we should not be using it. It should not be allowed to be used in the context of decisions of that format and with those consequences if we cannot check the logic, right? So for me, this is the key argument. Maybe then you can create a story proving that point, that there is no logic you can recreate, that the algorithm cannot speak for itself because it doesn't know its logic in a way. If you can tell a story about this, you can say, how come we allow this machine to be deciding for us if that machine cannot explain itself? Right? Maybe this is a way to attack those systems if we cannot bring them down to brown-eyed criminal and say, no, this is absurd.
Well, the point of the game isn't actually that the algorithm is the evil. Like, the point is like that it doesn't work. Like, in the end, the victors or whatever. But that's like something.
Well, there are people who believe that it's actually good. The guy behind the research, the Facebook research I was showing, and many other studies, because he does more. He actually defends algorithms by saying that we can design them in a more fair way than humans. Humans, judges, policemen, they are biased and they have many prejudices and stereotypes in their heads, and we cannot erase that. But we can, understanding what are the problems, we can redesign machines and algorithms to tell them don't discriminate on the basis of color. Don't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. When you make your judgments about criminals or pre-crime judgments, for example, don't take into account the skin color. I can theoretically think of that. So their argument is that they can fix human problems with the use of algorithms. But right now, I think it's the opposite. Algorithms are rather used by human system with all its stereotypes, with all its bias, because the data that are put into those systems that you describe are already biased because humans collected them.
Like, there's someone who selects the data in the algorithm and tweaks them and says like, oh, this is important for this data is important and this is less important. And like actually the algorithm is a model that only learns, it learns and predicts like basically a discriminatory model that we put in it. Like I think like if somebody says that an algorithm is objective, I think that's wrong.
Can be. I get the argument that it can be objective. Doesn't have to. It depends on how it was designed. But you can design it in a more objective way. I think I agree on that point. But in the context of pre-crime, it's it's evil. I agree. I mean, you cannot.
There was a question there in the back.
Okay.
Usually when you talk about algorithms and machine learning, sometimes it's easy to think about what you put a human in that. No, it's not that black box. And if you think of that, like actually there is a black box which is for all this data, and then the black box actually is kind of like idea of what the result should be. And if you have a human in that point, that you have like a kind of intuition. And then we have like, okay, let's say that we at Facebook will use only humans that I'm just going to walk to this room with all your posts and look, like briefly to things like, you want red shoes. That's my intuition. You cannot ask me how I know that. It's intuition. That's the same thing that happens in machine learning. That it's very hard to find what makes that particular choice to be the most probable one in that result. And trying to simplify and make things that can be explained would actually end up in having better algorithms as output than actually better ones. And the problem is like, how do you explain that? Like humans cannot explain their intuition. Is that a problem? Is the legal system to be, right? You cannot
if it's a legal decision or credit, it is a problem. If a banker tells you that my intuition is that you are not credible, it is a problem, right? You wouldn't like to be treated. I know, but
every day are directed by people, and people do make decisions not only about who to fire, but also where to spend money and how to design a logo or a brand identity based on things that maybe you could call intuitions, or maybe you give it another term, but something that doesn't have that linear causality of if this then that. And I think you make a good point there that like when we do the human decision making, yeah, we already have that problem. We of course try to kind of sometimes maybe even pretend that everything is really logic and it's well documented and written down. But in the end, I do believe that there's in a human decision making a lot of this things that are non-linear and not.
Of course, but specifically, I mean, and nobody will prohibit you from using your intuition in your life. I mean, you are absolutely free to decide on your own with regard to your own person. You can do whatever you like. But if you are a judge, if you are a policeman, if you are a credit scoring person in the bank, if you are a teacher, if you are a recruiter, and if you apply only those intuition-based processes, but you cannot explain your decisions to persons that are affected, it becomes problematic. So right now we got to the point, I mean, we have many legal protections already in place against discriminatory treatment by humans, right? So if you have serious context when somebody else is deciding on your life, let's simplify it, we normally expect that person to explain why. And if here comes machine, that is not explainable because it was based on machine learning process and not criteria that human defined and put into machine, we have a problem because everybody says, no, it's impossible to reverse engineer that logic. Then comes the question, can you use those machines in those processes? Can you do, I don't know, court decision based on machine?
If human also rationalize their choices, well, actually I did this because of that, and they did it, right? Even in the case of a job. And then you can have a machine that can rationalize an algorithm that can rationalize their choice and looks logical, but it's not. So how can you actually know that it's true or not? If a human does the same. A human can also like, I choose this because I follow these rules.
Can I say something? I don't think it's really a problem if the algorithm reads you right or not, if the profiling is right or not. I mean, I can profile you just by sitting here, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. The problem at the moment is that whatever those algorithms seem to be doing, they're feeding it back to us as a solid story, making you believe that whatever they read into your behavior in life, they make choices what you see, what you read. And I think on the optimistic side of things, we are already, maybe thanks to Trump at the moment, quite far in understanding how those mechanisms work. For example, you were referring to these elections, right? It's called Cambridge Polityka. It's the English organization that helped Trump basically win the elections by profiling people. So
yeah, that was the micro-targeting.
For example, 8 o'clock news.
when I grew up as a child, we all had to watch the 8 o'clock news. My parents, everybody had to shut up, watch the news. The whole Netherlands saw the same 8 o'clock news. Today, we still think we're watching the 8 o'clock news.
Yeah, that is.
We are each of us watching our own version of the 8 o'clock news. And that's the problem with making the consequences from those algorithms. Of course, it's good to understand how they work, but I think it's a major key thing to realize that the outcome of those algorithms, that you somehow are aware of what is influencing the world you think is the objective world, and it's not objective.
So with regard to news, I get your point that sometimes it might be not enough, but already a big step for us to be aware that it exists, because we might be more critical, right? So I think that I read your point like this.
The story about the elections in America made that so clear.
Yeah, even exaggerated. Even I would say even exaggerated. Like people from the company you mentioned, Cambridge Analytica, they were almost over-advertising their impact because they wanted that effect. They wanted people to believe they are magicians that can do that because they wanted more clients. I'm much more skeptical with regard to what can be actually done than what they advertised. But what they exposed was exactly this, that Facebook newsfeed is not your news agency. It's somebody else's news agency, and you don't know who is that person behind the scene, the screen. So understanding this is already a big step. And maybe, as you say, we don't really need to know the logic. Maybe it's enough for us to know that it's screwed up and we should not trust it. But if it's a bank, a criminal justice system, your future employer or not, if it's a decision on your life that you cannot negotiate, then it becomes important that you can question it. And you can question and say, no, I disagree with decisions. Back to your point, of course, humans are also, that's specific the point I also made, humans are also discriminating. But it's important that in both cases, if you feel discriminated by human and machine, you can confront this. You can say, prove me your point. And then you challenge human or you challenge machine and you say, hey, but your intuition was simply wrong, prove it to me. You must have the chance to have this dialogue. If you don't have that dialogue, you are in trouble. I'm not saying that humans are by definition less biased, not at all. I know they are, but with humans we have systems to confront them. You can have to appeal. You can appeal decision of the court to another court. You can ask in the bank why they gave you the scoring or not the other. You can check data on the basis of which they gave you scoring, and if you find there something which is bullshit, you can correct this or debate it. With the machine learning system black box, not so much, and that's why we are discussing this as a new phenomenon which became more problematic than human bias.
I want to bring something in because that's how we started, and I think maybe that's an interesting fact because we're storytellers here and ask ourselves like what kind of story is important right now to tell to people. And I was going back after Frederick said like, okay, we bring that into the story. So my approach was like how we even reach an audience that doesn't like actually understand what they're holding in their hand when they're using their smartphone and whatever. So I was wondering, for example, how is it in Poland? Like, do people or students learn in schools how their smartphone works, how the internet works, how is there a specific subject for that and things like that? Because I was always wondering, like, how can we expect to have a really strong, like, new democratic population that is growing up that doesn't know how the information they are getting is valid and how they can make an informed like vote or whatever. So because in Germany we don't have digital education basically.
No,
there's just like small things. Like I do workshops about fake news, and then we're talking for 2 days, and I find out that like kids cannot see what is fake news and what is like official news. They cannot see the difference. Like you showed us that page with the main top stories and the fake news stories. Like when I showed we play games like fake or fact, they don't know. And they don't care.
There's not a problem in Poland. Actually, there was research last year published by Natalia Katarzyna, and I don't remember exact numbers if this is 80 or over 60% of people, but for sure it's over 60% of people that actually cannot recognize and don't have, this level of awareness that they are seeing in newsfeed posts that very stimulated basing on what caused their reactions previously, what was commented by them, what was the sentiment. So, you know, these people are pushed more and more into being on other side. So this is like not giving them actually chance to see the whole context of situation, what's going on. A lot of young people are completely not aware of who they should vote on. So if they're fed by media constantly without having, you know, very basic knowledge what's going on, what they're seeing, they're basically unable to make any logical choice if they even have opportunity to change something in their country. And I think this, maybe for millennials, it's not a problem as big because they're still reading newspapers. They believe there should be something like quality news, but for younger people like 20 or under, I think if there will be like no crucial legal education in schools, even on level from public organizations or well-known companies that should put, you know, something like this as part of corporate social responsibility also, because they are very involved by their budgets in media, so they should somehow take responsibility if they think that, for example, Poland is an important market for them. So I hope, you know, watching this from media side, advertising side, that marketers will take responsibility for the audience, for their consumers, and they will somehow affect clients that they should invest in good quality communication, also educating their consumers, because in the end it will be seen as something, you know, better than saying that no, we are not using palm oil or something like this. Yeah.
No, but why should they do that? I mean, the best case scenario is a lot of stupid people who do whatever you say, like, you know, to put it blunt. But the companies don't have nothing for it. Depends on the company, of course, but if I want to sell, like, the best thing for me is to sell something as cheap as possible, low quality as possible, as high as price. So the best thing for me is an uninformed customer who buys anything I throw to him. No?
Well,
I mean
yeah, but from advertising side, I think like it would be for sure very hard to negotiate with very simple reasons of budget, as something that was working for years, decades. So why we should change that? But nevertheless, there are some movements that big companies somehow are trying to make good impression, build good PR, because this is long term, somehow it can be cheaper. So they, for example, are investing in some kind of schools, for example, for coding, for children, etc. So I think this is just like a medium for good information, good educational program. So maybe there is a chance. I don't think it will happen like in 10 years, I think, but thinking about it long term, at least I'm able to see the small light in the very dark tunnel. Maybe I'm too optimistic about this.
Because I thought so, and I worked with Google for a hate speech program in schools, and like, yeah, cool, there's a lot of hate speech going on YouTube, so finally this company is taking action. No, it was a marketing stunt. We did great workshops, but like it was only for, let's say, 2,000 people, and like and for them it was just like, like the social version of greenwashing, like we do something. It has to be something that a government is investing to, and the society is reachable on like every level.
I think the system is the problem. So.
Exactly.
Guys, I'm sorry. Let's because we're quite behind our schedule, so let's have the last question. I'm really sorry. It's really fascinating discussion, but then we will end up sitting here until midnight, and they will kick us out at 8.
That can be cool.
That would be
This group sounds like midnight is not too late.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to say, because I'm not European, I have another point of view, because you mentioned about the fake news and the real news, the mainstream news, and I don't know why you think or make difference between this mainstream news as a real news, because around 40 years Fox News, BBC, CNN just told lies to us, and we didn't have any rights, you know? And all of this hate speech that's come, it's, for me at least, it's not about the fake news from bad Russian guys and good West, but also two different kinds of propaganda that are fighting each other, and none of them have rights, you know. But at least in this Facebook time, we can have more right and activity against this. But those years with BBC, CNN, and Fox News, we didn't have any kinds of right. We had to just believe them, and it's for me more or less in this direction.
So you are more optimistic with regard to the right? No, that was specifically my point. Maybe I didn't make it clear that for me it's like the whole obsession with suddenly rediscovery of fakeness as a problem is ridiculous. We always had problem with credibility of news, absolutely. I'm in full agreement with you on that. So my point when showing that chart was to say that you can say cats versus something else on the graph, doesn't matter. What matters is the mechanics for me behind producing non-credible information, spreading it, and why rather the key is our mechanism as consumers to make judgments on this or to be able to control how we are fed with this. So for me it's absolutely crucial that we can make choices. If you don't like BBC, exactly, I mean you should be able to delete it from your information sphere. Why should you be fed with any kind of propaganda you don't want, right? Why anybody should be able to manipulate what you think, is this BBC, or is this anybody else? So absolutely, I'm not here making a point that new media versus old media, better or worse. It's rather showing you that the mechanics behind what we receive today is not clear to us, and that's problematic. And not that any content is better than any other content. It's not for me to judge. I think everybody should be making those choices specifically for themselves. So you might have very different choice than me, and it's cool. We should be able to have very different approaches, right? I might think that one medium is credible, you might think the opposite. Fair enough, but we should be deciding, not a company behind this doing this for us.
That's the thing, like when information really is in people's hands. I mean, it was always the case that media was used by the people in power. So this is like, I would just like to add to this. I don't know, like, conversation, I think what really the problem is like the experts, they don't really understand what's going on. I think there's also a big lack of interdisciplinarity as well. Because you see like the algorithm at universities pretty much works in most areas of human life at the moment.
True.
So, you know, like if you have macroeconomics being, I'm reading an article about Wall Street being controlled mainly by computers and not by economists. Not that human.
And they also have failures around this.
Exactly, but not that human behavior was never better. Because it's not that the human judgment.
No, wait, it was. The point with internet. The arrival of internet was the promise of something else. I'm not referring to old times when we had 5 newspapers as the perfect model. I'm referring to the promise made by internet. When it arrived, it was the promise specifically of something better, wasn't it? And now we end up having one monopoly.
There was a romanticism, but now that it spread so much, of course, like all the part of commercial and capitalist powers comes in place, but you still have all the rest of human life. So if you see it in like all spectrum, internet just has everything. In that sense, Facebook can be a tool of very creative commenting, and it can also be a tool of advertising, which is like what's the case with most human activity. I think the problem of it here is that we don't really understand what's going on generally right now between politics and economics, and there is no interdisciplinarity. Really, it's not about just the narratives that we give like to consumers or like the citizens. It's also that the experts don't understand exactly what's going on. There's not really I don't know, maybe it's about like bringing in media historians together with doing like speculation of what the future will be. I think there's a lot of insecurity because you can't predict. I think that's the main part of insecurity right now. That we cannot predict what's going to happen because everything is really more free flowing. I don't like to say it in a way that people are really struggling to understand. I think even experts are trying to understand.
Well, true, it's happening quite quickly. All those processes, they change quite quickly, but I think being passive and just watching how this new media landscape is being shaped and not trying to understand it, not trying to be critical, it's even worse. I agree with you that to a great extent we don't have good solutions yet. We don't have counter models that we can show. Although myself, I have counter model for myself. I'm simply not relying on platforms that profile me. I'm choosing my own media outlets, and I'm really happy about them. Because thanks to internet and thanks to the fact that you can produce information at cheaper price, critical people like me who I know are also creating media today. I don't have to go to BBC for information. I can go to places created by my friends who know certain topic better than BBC. They are able to communicate with me online because it's cheap for us to do this. Yes? I only need to know that they exist, and I need a channel of communication with them. So trying to create those alternatives and managing those alternative spaces is possible. Nobody takes this away from us. But if most of the people, most of the consumers, like most of the people who are in schools today and have no idea about how internet is built and how those companies operate, because nobody is teaching them, and they are born into this, they will never even go for alternative way, right? This is the problem I think we have to face. It's not about us we are fine. I think we will find a way because we already understand this. But what about all those people who are now young and will be living in this new media world without understanding those rules? I think this is what we have to solve somehow, as those who maybe have better understanding. But anyway, I wish we had more time for actually talking about this, but maybe it's not the last time we see each other. I can leave you my contact. Sorry. Yes,